Afternoon, folks. Can you hear me okay? Good, thank you. So I am doing a recording today. Had some trouble with Voice Meter, having some conflicts with my Realtek driver, I think it is, Realtek audio driver. So I've had to split the audio, so come into Discord separately instead of through OBS, but I have a copy running in OBS and should have a recording of this session as well. I'll post it up on YouTube. It'll take a little while to process. I'm just going to record the whole session. Works for everybody? Okay, assignment 2, I believe we're handing in today, right? Somebody has handed in already, so thank you. Get on to marking those. I have one remark still to do. I'll get to that probably over the weekend. A couple of us had some conversations over the course of the week, so we'll continue those. Today we wanted to talk about an on-screen menu or a HUD and a little bit about assets. We talked last week a bit about Marketplace as an option for some of your assets, and we had a discussion about cautioning you from downloading the whole big asset pack into your project, but instead downloading it into a Scratch project and then just migrating the assets that you want out of that to your project to help keep your project cleaner. You can always delete them, but it's harder to delete them because you're never sure what's used by what asset packs when you download it. So if you just migrate in the piece you want, it'll take all the subcomponents and move for you. Probably a better way down. Today's discussion on assets will be a little bit different. We're going to grab a couple assets and just show you some of the common things you might run into downloading assets from various sites. Build a bit of an on-screen menu to get rid of the print debug statements or statements on the side of the screen. Last night I sent a link to Discord, or yeah, on our Discord channel about the source from last week, I guess it was, which is our starting point for this week. Over here. So this is the link I sent, which was just to last week's code where we had done some terrain sculpting. I think we'd imported a height map, and then we used a spline and built some topology based on that. We talked a little bit about foliage and the fact that you can put some in now. I would hold off on putting a whole lot in until you're happy with your overall design. If you're still making a lot of changes to the terrain and to the placement of stuff, foliage would appear a little later. And we did a bit of gray boxing stuff. This implementation also had the blueprint interface in it and the sphere trace for interacting with objects as well. That's the project we started with, or we finished with last week. But we'll start with. Did anybody have any problems downloading that? Not seeing any problems. Did anybody try downloading it? If you're not using Git directly, you can just choose to, under code, download the zip file here. So far in the semester, we're on week number 6. We got you going with the Epic Games and did our very little first blueprint that very first day where we did the boss key, get the escape to quit. Second week, we got into doing blueprints in more detail. Then we did some work on materials. Audio was a couple of weeks ago. And I had an audio conversation. And yes, sorry for poking my nose in. I quite often go through some of the other channels in here on Discord. Made a couple of comments in the game sound one. it was just interesting conversation about how to create the sounds and that. And yeah, LMMS might be an interesting way. Reaper, I think, is probably the preferred tool in some cases, but either both tools would uh, probably mean some learning curve. Um, Probably out in the industry, you would more likely to encounter something like Reaper than LMMS. Depends on experience with it. And then the comment that I made was that some of those bass sounds can be created in Unreal Engine meta sounds as well. I linked a page to some meta sounds, a meta sound documentation page, and the source code or recreated the code represented in that. So if you're interested, it's over in your game sound. Then last week we did our discussion on levels, maps, gray boxing. Today we're going to get into assets. When we go through the process today, it'll become obvious that we're still missing one component and that'll be next week. Talk about game instances and save game objects and stuff to sort of final the process. I mean, we still have another whole semester of learning to do. I think we're covering off a lot of the basics in pretty decent timing. So this was the link I shared last night. This is where we're at in the semester. We look at our slide deck. This is the slide deck up on the system. So HUD and assets. So we're going to create a user interface or a HUD, heads up display or on screen menu. We'll deal with some buttons and images, a progress bar, anchors and alignment on them. Doing dynamic updates. So we'll actually take the value from our score for coins and for health and display that on the screen. We're going to talk enhanced input, and towards that end, I've switched over to my wired Xbox controller. My wireless one's green, and it doesn't show up on the green screen. So we're just going to do a brief discussion on enhanced input, how it sort of does a hardware abstraction layer for us, so that we can program and design for multiple platforms or multiple controllers without actually having to modify a bunch of different blueprints every time we want to change an input option. And we'll talk about importing game assets, and then we may have time for this one. We may push this one off on using 3D. So motion graphics is the UMG or HUD type system. We're going to go through this in detail on each one, but just quickly going through the slide deck. Another blueprint is a type of blueprint, user interface widget. One of the things, if you're used to an older version or are using an older version of Unreal for some reason, the presence of this green canvas panel in version 5 is not there by default, and we have to add it if we're doing it this particular way. If you were using version 4, this canvas panel would have been there by default, and it's just a little thing that catches you off guard if you're used to the version. Some blueprint programming around the initiating or instancing the HUD on the screen, and then we'll actually get into doing a mini map type environment to show you an enhanced material, and as well user interfaces or menus or widgets. Specific on the material where we've desaturated it for a gray environment. Toggling our mini map on and off. Again, some blueprint programming inside the widget. What the actual product's going to look somewhat like. Discussion on our enhanced input, how we're going to control it and set it up. One of the changes here that we'll talk about when we actually build our menu system, and then we update with enhanced input. So I see your question there, Nick. Yes, I do have like a flight stick controller and stuff. There is no requirement in what I'm doing in the curriculum to use a game controller. I just like people often want to do that, especially if we get into a split screen multi-user game where you'd have one or two controllers, or person plays on the keyboard and the other person plays on the controller. Um, but yeah, we can have a discussion, and it could just be a separate video, not structured in this last time, talking about how to use something like a blade stick. Be different for that. PS4 controllers is another one that is a little bit different than an X type input. I think, if I recall correctly, on the Mac platform, Unreal Engine automatically recognizes the PS4 controller just as another gamepad, and it works. And on the Windows platform, you either have to use a shim like Rewasd or one of those programs in order to make the PS4 controller work. Yeah, so PS5, same thing. You need one of these shim programs, whether it's like Rewasd or if you're going through Steam or something like that. The light sticks and stuff like that typically have a similar requirement to have a different driver or different process, opposed to just the X. Then we'll talk a little bit about some open source assets. You guys have probably found a lot of these already from last year, but we'll go through and just look at some of them again. Different options. I mean, we've seen OpenGameArt a couple of times this year, and Sketchfab, I think I showed you early on. There are changes coming with Sketchfab, Megascans, and Epic Games has a big controlling share in Sketchfab, so they're changing Sketchfab to be Fab, and Megascans and Sketchfab and Pixel Bridge are all rolled. So an example of a model that was imported, and when this particular model imports the canopy material, the translucent quality of the canopy, the windshield, doesn't come through. So when we import the model, we can go through and make some changes to the material or replace the material. So that's the kind of thing you might run into for importing assets. And then this gets into equipping characters, so we may get to that. This, if we do this one today, we'll switch projects because the project we're using today is the first person character, and we equip the gun, but you really can't see the hands and all that. And this exercise works better at third person. Just some further enhancement with the enhanced input section. Now, recommended review and topic to look at is this begin play material on UMG, Unreal Motion Graphics, which is the user input, and this is the one enhanced input system. The HUD system here in UMG, quite a complex system. So if you're looking to really dive in and do some interesting or different stuff with it, this is the link to the Begin Play UMG section. It takes you through about half an hour of discussion about what's possible and some of the options for it. We're going to just cover the very basics of it. Any other questions as we get started? Oh, I guess I should show you where we're going. We look at this project. So again, I'm glancing off to the side, just making sure the recording's running and the video's coming through and stuff. So. Okay, so this is our project from last week with a couple of augmentations to it. We've got the HUD on it now. By default, the controller inputs work on the templates, so that's not been added to this. But things like doing the trace and implementing the but to do that using the shoulder button new or added. So again, I might want to make the trace a little bigger here. I can't even hit the coin that's right in front of me. And we also have the addition of a pause function. Pausing the game, unpausing the game, and something to turn the mini map on. And this particular character is simply a set of hands. If you look in the third person blueprint, it's a set of hands and arms and the pistol. So it's really hard to see the character running around. So what we've done is added a marker indicator so you can see the player as they run around the game environment. And you notice right now this has a perspective view, so you see top-down view with the image sloped in. Now you can change the view to perspective and whatnot. And again, you can toggle these on and off if you want. And as we're collecting coins, you see our coin is incrementing there, and as we run through the fire, we're getting the yeah, funny. Hopefully that's not your view of the class. Okay, so this is the sort of where we're going to take our existing project. And this is where we left it. So just opening performance monitor so I can see keep track of system load while we're doing this. Okay, so this is where we left our project last week. And we actually set the project to open on this particular level. And as we're running around, we had placed a couple of coins here, and we were using F to interact. And we see the coins being displayed and the health being displayed. That's a print debug statement. So 92% health and 1 coin collected. Does anybody recall why I can run through the forest here and not if I able to run through these objects? Yeah, the lack of collisions on the foliage. So when we distributed foliage, they're by default placed or distributed without the collision mesh enabled. In the case of a forest, that kind of works because you can sort of walk through the trees and around them, and you may want to get into something like a custom collision mesh where you would have a mesh that was specific to just the trunk of the tree and not the branches, and that way you could walk through the branches but not the trunk. Depends on what your game is about. You want to. That is why we can walk through them. Somewhere in game we had placed a couple of objects, items. I think I deleted them afterwards. Here they are, 3. So I'm actually focus in on this one. This is actually placed in the game as a standalone static mesh, and I couldn't walk through this because it has a collision mesh wrapped around it. And the default collision mesh is a very low poly blob around it. And that's one of the reasons why they don't distribute with meshes on, is that these big blobs, a forest like we have here, would present an unpassable environment when we had them stacked or distributed. Okay, I'm not a big fan of this particular level. I'm just going to go back to opening level. I don't know if you recall where we set the level that the game starts in. If we go under Edit, Project Settings, Apps and Modes, we can tell the editor to start on one level. So here it starts on level 3. And if we were to package and play the game, it would start on first person map. So we've actually got them set differently right now. The idea being here is that you might be still working or developing the game, and it would save you switching to this map if you were still working. So here's where we were. I think other than where we were last week, I made a couple of changes before I distributed it last night, and one was the coin here. We didn't have a pickup or a collectible. Anybody have any guesses on who I've minted on this particular coin? Ah, no, it's not Wallace. Somebody a little higher up the food chain. Nope, not you. You get a chance, take a look in the code and see if you can figure out who it is. So anyways, I added the coin here just as a collectible item, and set it to count coins as well. So if we look at our third person blueprint here, the other change that we made was the increment coins function. Doug Ford, no, nothing that political. So in here, we added an increment coins and tracked an integer to track coins. Other than that, this is the project where we left off, and we had our materials discussion in this project as well. Okay, so let's add our menu system. If we go back to our slide deck here, so we're going to add a new type of widget here, and it's our user interface widget, and we're going to build menu, and then we'll augment the menu, build a couple of submenus of it. So first thing we're going to need is somewhere to store our components for this. So I'm going to create a new folder and just call it my HUD, so you have an idea where these things are found. You may probably choose to name them a little bit different, but I've just put the my in front of a lot of these so you can tell that it's stuff that I've sort of manually inserted here. In your game, you could choose a better naming convention. So in here, we're going to add a user interface widget blueprint. So it's a special type of blueprint, and I'm just going to call it main HUD. This is going to be our main HUD environment. And double clicking on it brings up the HUD environment for editing the screen. This is the editing screen, or the designer screen, for what the screen is going to look like. And there's graph tab over here is the blueprint programming one. So you can switch between the two here, and it defaults to being in the designer mode. This is where, if you're used to previous versions of Unreal, this would have been pre-populated with the canvas panel here. I'm going to just do a search up here for canvas and add the canvas panel. There's the search. So this is pretty much the extent of our screen, and will, within reason, auto scale based on your screen orientation and your your playback device's screen orientation. So, for example, if you're on a graphic tablet, you may have a square format like a 13:9 instead of a 16:9 format. Or if you're on an old display, you could even have a 4:3 formatted screen, and this would attempt to do some of the resizing for you. The UMG system with Unreal is quite extensive, can be somewhat complex, but what it's trying to do is remove some of the complexity of designing the interfaces from you so that it can handle some of the resizing and placement without you having to program that into each of the different items. So I've added a canvas panel here, and you can see as soon as I added something, I had the compile button here has gone amber, just compiling it and or saving it. I've now saved and compiled this. There's nothing on. In the list of components here, we've got a number of different options, and there's one called common, and they are the common items that we would add. So I'm just going to drag out a piece of text, and I'm going to leave it up. Now let's make it a little more obvious. I've purposely just placed it off center. You can sort of see where it is here. We're going to talk about this in a minute. And let's change. So with the piece of text highlighted, you can see in the outliner panel down here, I can also select the items. This piece of text has a text to be displayed, and right now it says text block. So let's just change this to comp 116 so we can see where it's referencing it. The text has a name, so this is text block 0. So if I was going to access it programmatically, it would be text block 0, and I can change that. This particular text is the actual text that is displayed. So let's take this wonderful HUD and display it on our screen. If we just play, it doesn't show up. We haven't done anything yet. So we need to add this widget to the screen environment. We could add it in the level blueprint, and every time this level started, it would display. But more probably appropriately, we wanted to add it to the first-person characters blueprint so that every time the character is spawned, it's displayed. It's up to you. We could either do it in the level blueprint, keeping in mind that if you do it in the level blueprint for every level that you start and you want this particular menu on, you would have to add it to this level. And that would simply be in here, an event begin play. So when this level starts, do something, and what we're going to do is we create a widget. Zooming in on here, you'll see what class do we want. Well, the class is the main HUD that we just created. And I'm going to drag out from the return value and say add to viewport. Highlighting the items, turn on my keycaster. Highlighting the items here if they were sort of higgly-piggly around here, and using the Q key to line them up. C to add a comment. Adds menu to viewport for this level. Again, I made a change. I compile it and or save it. And now we have this lovely piece of text floating around as part of the on-screen menu in front of us. Okay, that's it. Let's go. We're done. We got a few more things to talk about, but that is the high-level process where we design a screen, and then in this case, I've chosen for demonstration purposes to add it to the level blueprint so that if we were to go here and go to level 2, it's not here on level 2 because our level 2 level blueprint does not contain the code to spawn that particular widget that was done in the level blueprint. So this, we may want this to go into, I've just highlighted and hit the wrong key. You can tell I was working on a Mac a few minutes before class. Hitting other keys for copying. So Control C to copy this. And if we open the first person character and we look through our first person character for an event begin play, I don't think we have an event begin play item here. So I'm going to right click and add event begin play. If I did this and one already existed, it would snap me to that particular one. So there was no event begin play for this. I'm going to add it here. And then back on the first person level, so I'm in the level blueprint, you can see that down here. I'm going to disconnect this for now. Right, so I've disconnected this in the level blueprint. This code will not execute. In the first person blueprint, I've added the display of the widget. If we come back here, I still have my wonderful HUD being displayed here. But this time, if I go to the next level, you can see the HUD still here, right? Each time the players spawned, this event begin play is going to run. So depending on how you're doing your levels and menuing system, you can spawn it a couple of different places. You could spawn it in the game controller as well. For now, we'll leave it in the first person character. Okay, so let's go make our HUD a little more interesting. One of the things that happens is, depending on how your screen is sized, and if you have the opportunity to try the game on multiple screens or different devices with different size screens, the location of this particular piece of text relative to the main environment is going to change, and that's controlled by this anchor point. Right now, no matter how your screen is sized, it's always going to try and keep these similar proportions with this piece of text reference this particular anchor point. There are a number of different techniques for referencing this. With these simple menus or HUDs, I tend to take items on the top half of the screen and sort of anchor them to the top center of the screen, and items that are going to be in the bottom half of the screen, I anchor them to the bottom half of the screen. And to change the anchor, you can mess around here, or you can go here and just say this anchor point. You can see the rows has changed to the top center. So now whenever this HUD is displayed, it's going to try and display this piece of text relative to the top center of whatever device screen you're on. So if you're on a square screen, it's still going to be trying to be center. And if it's on a wider screen, it's still going to be try to be center based on the fact that I've referenced the top center of this. Now this is probably not where we'd want a piece of the HUD. This particular mouse, and when I've got it set up here for, gives me grief with playing. So you can also change the position here. And I'm just going to slide it up. Slide it over a bit. So now this piece of text is going to stay relatively the same location for each different device that you try it on. In the menu, in the text itself, you can change things like color. So the color, the font. So what I found quite often is, 32-point font and a 2-point outline, depending on what part of your menu is in, give you a pretty decently readable piece of text. The outline just helps it stand out from the background a bit, and then font size based on how old you are, I guess, and how much screen real estate you can afford. The reference here is to position, or the anchor position. I'm going to move this over, and this is going to become part of our display. So instead of saying comp 116, let's change the actual text. So I've got the text highlighted, and again, I can highlight it in the viewport here for editing, or I can highlight it in the outliner down below. And with it highlighted, we can change the text field, and this could be health. I'm going to say health colon and put a space in. And we're going to scroll down here, set the alignment to right aligned. So now it's aligned to the right hand side. I might choose to size this a bit. And this would be just the visual text for health. And if I actually wanted to display the current health value, we could add another piece of text. And I'm going to purposely set it off kilter here a little bit, and we'll fix it up in a minute. First thing I'm going to do with this text block is, you can see it's automatically been named text block 1. So I'm just going to call it text block health, or text health. See why in a minute. And then for the actual what's displayed right now, it's just going to say number. I probably want this to be set the same at 32 points and 2-point outline. Drag it. I know it's not lined up and it's done on purpose. We will fix that in a minute. So if we play, our game would have this health and number being displayed at the top. What we would like to do is replace that number with the actual number retrieved from health variable that's stored in a first-person character, right? We have health here in our first-person character, and this is where we're updating it. And it's also this little piece of code right here, temporarily print health and coins, is the part that's responsible for this annoying red flashing here. And we've seen this all work where we walk through the fire, the 100 decrements, and when we pick up coins, the coins increment. So I'm going to simply break this for now. I'll reroute node. And I'm just going to break this right here. It's in. Disabled. Now that working HUD in place. So the HUD's not quite working yet, but it'll save me coming back and updating this comment again. So if we look in our game environment now, we no longer have that annoying red health value being displayed on the corner, but we also don't know what our health is right now. So we're going to go and fix that with the HUD. So we have this piece of text highlighted. And right now, the text, what's being displayed, is set based on this number, and we have an option to bind it to a piece of code or blueprint. So we're going to say create binding, and it's opened a new blueprint. So you can see here, we just take a second to see what's going on. We have the event graph, which is where our kind of event begin play stuff, but it's again, here it's event construct, reconstruct type thing. We have our binding for this widget blueprint, and then remember these two buttons at the top? When I picked binding, it automatically flipped us over to the graph editor and created this new graph for us. And this is our input to the code, and this is the output to the code, and we're going to build something in between here. So again, I was in the designer, and when I said bind, it automatically created this new function for us, and you can see in our list of functions, once I save it, we'll have this get text health function. So what we want to do here is cast to BP first person character. We're going to get controller. Get player character, not controller. And as the first person character, I want to do something. I want to get the value of health. So I'm going to get health. I could set it, but in this case I want to get it. And then notice that if I hover over here, it tells me this is the health variable and it's a float. And if I hover over this pin, which is a salmon color or pink color, it's a return value that's being fed into the screen widget, this piece of text. So when I connect these, if it's going to work, it's automatically going to do the thing for me here. If I connect it to the return value, sorry, when I dragged out, I clicked on the wrong spot and I'm just having to manually re-add the return node. So this should, when the menu is initiated, it's going to cast to the third person character, going to get the value of the health variable, convert it to a string piece of text, and then return it. And if I didn't mess this up too badly, save all here. When we play, we now have 100 being displayed instead of our word number. And if I run through here, my fire alarm is doing a test just because we don't have enough fire alarm tests at the college. That's what the chirping was you just heard. So as I walk through the fire, you can see my health is updating on screen. I'm also getting the green debug print that we added on the take any damage event. So I now have a functioning health display. I'm just going to highlight this and say get health from player object. So this, when I was in the designer, we had the text highlighted, and it still says number here, which is fine. We've added this binding on the value of text, and you can see now instead of having the default text where it said number, it now says it's bound to this function, and that function, you know, function here in the graph, and either double click it here, or if it's still open, the input to the function and the return to the function and what we're doing. Okay, so in our designer, so we're in the main HUD widget. I said don't worry about these being misaligned, and I purposely misaligned them a little bit. We can do things like add a horizontal box. So I think if we come down to panel, we can add a horizontal box in here. And we now have this horizontal box in our outliner here. If we drop these onto it, it'll nest them And you can see now they're nested and lined up. Now, what we want to make sure though is that our horizontal box is anchored to the right one. So I've got the box itself highlighted. And I just want to make sure that it's anchored to the top center of the screen. And again, you can see on this particular screen, and if I resize my screen, you can see it's changing a little bit. It's trying to keep that relative distance from the edge of the screen. So I might choose to change that a little bit or do it differently. For now, I'm just going to slide it over a little bit. Some things it will let you change. I don't know if you noticed there, I was still simulating or running the game, and it let me change that. Anyways, I have my health being displayed here. Notice now that they're lined up vertically, and within this particular environment, I can choose to pad these out. There are options for padding the different cells between each other, and right after, well, let's do this right now. I've got the horizontal box highlighted here. We can duplicate this. We end up with another one, and we end up with two of everything, and placed it over here. So this will look just like it looks like it's going to, where we have it showing up twice. But they are properly lined up, and we could then simply go in and make a couple of changes. So this particular piece of text is just called text block again, but instead of saying health, let's change it to say coins. That way I can choose to pad this out because I would like to line those up a little bit. And for number, instead of saying text health 1, we're going to say text coin. And it's just going to say number for now. But notice that it didn't copy the binding, and we're just going to create a new binding. So just compiled and saved it with this particular item, text coin, highlighted. And you can see I've renamed it up here. If I do a bind, create binding, it's going to do the exact same for us. So much so that we could just go to the health option here. Highlight this. Go to our coins. Paste it in. But of course, we don't really want to get the health this time. What we want to get is the point. So we're just going to drag out as the third person character. We're going to get coins. It'll do the conversion from integer. Okay, if we come back to our game, play our game, we now have 0 coins, 100 health. Come up, pick up our coin. We have 1 coin, 2 coins, and the same interaction, the F key, of course. If we hit the item, turns the light on or turns it off, so it's picking up or whatever based on blueprint interface that we talked about previously. So we have health and coins being displayed. On our menu so far, and we've done that in the designer. I guess the only other thing we could add here would be a vertical box. So if we come back down to panels, add a vertical box to help center these items. We could then place each of these horizontal boxes inside the vertical box, and then we can size and position the vertical box. Again, we want to make sure it's anchored relative to the top center, and placed it too far over, so let's grab it. Okay, so we now have our default layout with a dynamic or updated blueprint where the numbers for the health and coins are being displayed and updated as our player encounters health issues or picks up coins. Now, one thing that is happening here or isn't happening is that we're not getting our progress bar. Remember in the example I showed you at the beginning of class, the health actually had a progress bar. So after lunch, after break, we will do a progress bar, and then we'll continue on with a couple of buttons after we do the progress bar. Does that sound good for everybody? So a 10-minute break, we'll come back, we'll do the progress bar, and then we'll do a mini map demonstration and a pause button. And maybe we'll do it in the other way. We might do the pause. Sound good? Any questions about what we've covered so far? Or did everybody already go on break? Okay, so let's have a 10-minute break. We'll come back and we will do the progress bar, the pause button, and then the mini map. Okay, back in 10. Welcome back. Can you confirm that you can still hear me properly? Good, thank you. Okay, so let's get going on the menu and stuff again. Before we do, though, if you have a chance, have a look at our notes online and some of the recordings that are up there, and let me know if you have any comments or feedback on them. Um, if the format's working, the style's working. We're halfway through this semester, but chances are pretty good you're going to have me for a class next semester as well. Um, and I plan on kind of the same delivery. I'm building it out now. It's the 2141 virtualization class. So, and I don't need an answer right away, but thank you, Felix. If you do over the course of the next few weeks have some comments or thoughts on them, let me know, good or bad. I mean, the idea with the bad ones is that it can help make it better for you in some particular way. Okay, let's get back to our game environment. Let's get back to our game setup here, and if we come back to our notes, I want this one. If we look at our notes for today's class, the slide deck that we've been talking about is contained here. Our references to the UMG material and the enhanced input material are here. And in the case of the videos and stuff, they're typically in this online material. It's the online version of the discussions that we're having, and you can see various key screenshots, and quite often the screenshots are the same as the ones that are in the slide deck. But at the bottom of all the slide deck, I mean, there's some additional information that's not in the slide deck, because I afforded a little more real estate for some verbiage here. But at the bottom of all the slide decks, of course, are the topic-specific videos as well. They cover a lot of these. Not in the exact same detail or same order, but it's in there. Okay, let's, so just a reminder that that's there. And if we look at our slide deck, we covered this section on adding the user widget, and we're just starting to build this out, and we're about to start the progress bar discussion. The videos online do not contain the discussion about the horizontal and vertical boxes. Doing a really simple one, I did put those in, thrown in on the fly today for that. Similarly, when we do our discussion here about the progress bar, the pre-recorded video shows you a different process to do this, or different trick to positioning it. We'll try a more appropriate way of doing it, which involves an overlay widget or component, and I always struggle with it until I remember to fill it to the size of the available space. This we did early on in the process about adding the display of the widget to the third person character, and then we'll get into doing our mini map. That's slide deck. Okay, so what we'd like to do now is put in a progress bar for our health, because what good is knowing our health if you can't have a nice quick visualization? Not very many games that don't have some kind of visualization on their health status, and most of them don't often have a number, so we're going to have the number and we'll do the visualization. So because they are so common, the actual progress bar is an item in the common section, and we're just going to drag out and drop a progress bar here. I'm going to drag it out and drop it here, and we're just going to program it and talk about it, and then we can position it properly in a few minutes. I'm just going to randomly size it, And with it highlighted, you can see it's highlighted here, progress bar 0, and I might choose to change that name. So I could right click and rename it here, or I could, with it highlighted in the details panel, change the name here. I'm just going to say progress bar health. We might end up with multiple progress bars. We might have 15 coins distributed across this level, and we could have a progress bar on how many of the coins have been collected, because we can't go to the next level until all the coins are collected. So progress bar health. Here we have the default bar in its lovely shade of gray. Yet the fill and color density here in opacity's got this funny blue color. Let's start looking at some of this stuff. We have options for anchors, so we want the anchor to be the top relative to the top center again. So the positions here, we can adjust the size here. Alignment options we won't need right now. Style we're going to talk about. Accessibility. Where is the one that says percent here? Progress right here. So under progress percent, you can see it says 0. And if I just drag across on this, you can see, just like any of the number input fields, we can drag across on it, or I could do like 0.2, 0.8 or something like that. Notice this display here is changing as I make these changes. So if I compile this and save this, play it, we now have a funny blue colored progress bar in the middle of our screen. So I wanted to drag this percentage out to show you the how you can see or visualize what it's going to look like. But I also wanted to point out that watch when I scale this. This says percentage, but it's scaling from 0 to 1, not 0 to 100. Remember, we stored our health as a float up to 100. We initialized it at 100, 100% health. You're good. So, first thing we might want to fix is this color. To me, health, the bar would be green and red. Green on the left side when your health is good, decrementing, getting redder as your health decreases. Up to you how you want to run it, but right now it's going to fill type is left to right. So 0% fill would be all the way done, and 100% fill would be 1. It would be completely filled. You can see this fill color is blue, and if you just casually glance down the list here, this particular appearance panel generally defaults to open, and you know where the blue culprit is. It's here. So we can come in here and we can just dial in some red. So we can either use the sliders, or I'm just going to say 100% red, 0% green, 0% blue. And we now have a slider that's red on the wrong side, because I'm thinking here I want 100% green. This is my healthy side. So I've got my nice green here. So now when my health's good and I'm all the way up here at 100, I've got a nice green bar. And as I decrement my health, I'm getting a green and gray bar. Now we need to find the gray culprit here, and that's under style. And under background image, we can change the tint here, I believe. And you can see I just dialed in this purpley color, so I got purple. So again, if I want it to be, so now I've got kind of a pure green, pure red, and I'm sliding back and forth between the two based on this progress percentage. So with these colors set up, we now need to actually control the position of the progress bar. And as we were sliding this back and forth, you may have noticed here This is a static value, like where we typed the word number before. In these ones, there's this percentage, and we can slide it back and forth. Here, we can bind it to a function, and we can create a new binding. And actually, we're going to want to grab the health value again. So I'm going to health, grab our health, and do a Control-C to copy it. And we're going to the progress bar function. I'm going to break that. We're going to paste in the get the health value because we need to get health. I'm going to connect the health function. So we're casting third person. We're going to get the value of health. Now health, remember, is 0 to 100. So we actually want to divide it. So we want to divide a float. We want to divide it by 100 so that our health value, which ranges from 0 to 100, is now scaled 0 to 1. And that's the value that we're going to return in a return node, and we'll connect our return. I'm just going to add a comment here. Scales health to 0 to 1 from 0 to So just a little explanation as to why we did this in the code so that we can keep track of it if somebody else was to look at this. So if this binding works, so again in the designer, we just sort of pop down this progress bar. We change the colors in the style for the red background here and in the fill overlay here. And you can set these as marquees so they have sort of rotating images, and you can use images, and we'll use image on a button in a few minutes. Here it's just a simple progress bar in the background. And then for the percentage, notice now that it's changed. I no longer have the slider here. Now have it bound to this particular function. And when we created that function, it flipped us over to the graph, and we were able to do this graph. See the main event graph, the get health, get coins, or get percentage graph that we just created. So it's all compiled and saved. If we actually play in game now, I've got a totally green bar. If I run through the fire, my health's at 70 and my bar looks appropriately decremented as I hit each of these. So I now have a progress bar in the wrong place on the screen, but I have a progress bar. So this is the part that gets messy for me usually. I'm going to grab this, and if I just visually drop it over top of here, that's fine, except for it's in front. You can actually adjust the level that it's displayed on, and if I just do a -1, it moves it back 1, and you could see that I could almost get away with this. I'm sure the progress bar is highlighted. It becomes really hard to see. I'm messing it up already. It gets hard to make this work. Highlight the progress bar and use sliders here to position it. So this could look like it's working, and if I was to play in game here, other than the slight misalignment, this appears to be close to what you would want. It needs to be a little bit larger, possibly, and it needs a bit of resizing. So that kind of works, but there is another way to do it, and this is the part that gets a little messier. If I use an overlay widget, there's an item that is purposely built to overlay them, and the reason to do this is that if I wanted to grab this piece of text and change its position, remember I nested the the health and the health number, coin and coin number, each in their own horizontal boxes. Then I nested those in a vertical box. And what that let me do is with the vertical box highlighted, I could move it, but look what's not happening. The health bar is not moving with it, so I need it in there. And if I was just to grab the progress health bar and drop it into here, it would end up being a third item here and not overlaid behind it. I want to actually layer, I want to embed it. And the proper way to do that is to use this overlay option. Control Z to undo it. I'm going to select the vertical box back to close to where it was. Okay, so with the overlay box, I'm going to drag the overlay box out, and I'm going to try and drag it in and drop it on the below the health number here. And I'm actually going to take health number and drop it on overlay. And I'm going to take progress and drop it on overlay as well. And I want here. I need it nested at the same level. So if you look carefully at this, we now have the vertical box in blue there. It's nesting this horizontal box and this horizontal box. And within this horizontal box, we have the health field, and now we have the overlay field, and we have health number and progress health bar, the same one. The challenge I always have with this is in getting these configured the right way. So I'm just changing the order here. So now I've got number on top of the progress health bar, even though in the display it's the other way around. I wonder if, oh, it might be because I had to one. So with the health bar, I want to make sure these are set to fill that particular one, because if I change the alignment, you can see here the alignment left centered, it doesn't fill the available space. I want it to fill the available space. This should give us a bit better health bar, and I still have a problem with it here. Probably want to set a bigger size. I set a bigger size before I started messing with it. I'm going to pull it all the way out. And if I set the position, I set this size here to 200. I think I can force the size and then it'll resize to an appropriate. So I pulled it all the way out, and you can see now it's not nested. So I'm going to go back in and nest it again on the overlay and put it in there. Overlay one should be set to go the full width as well. There, fill button. So now I've got a nice big health bar, and as we move through the fire, we're getting the decremented health. And if I was to grab the vertical box that contains all of our objects now and move it, you can see the progress bar is moving with it. So this now has a better setup for our health bar. And if I was to move these things around, I could, for example, put coins on top simply by grabbing this box and moving it up top here. Should be able to stuff and totally moved it right out. It's no longer in there, so I could undo that, put it back in, but I can change the order just by changing these two horizontal blocks. The coins are on top. On the bottom. So looking at that, the 32-point font may be too big for this particular layout. You might go with something smaller. That's certainly a aesthetic choice that you can make in your menuing system. Let's just sort of dynamically displaying or updating information for us based on values that are happening in the game. So what if we wanted to do a pause button, or we wanted to actually control the environment? So we can do the same thing here in the components tab here. I look for common, and there's an option for button. And again, I'm just going to drop it in here now. We can start playing with the button a little bit. The button is button 0. So in the details panel, I'm going to call it button underscore pause instead of button 0, so that any logic that we build on it is going to reference button pause as opposed to button 0. Give you a better idea of what's going on. I could size this appropriately. For now, I'm going to drop it here. Later on, we'll incorporate it in the vertical box. We can change the colors here, and we'll get into that in a minute. I'm going to put a piece of text on top of the button. I'm going to drag out text, and if I actually drag it and drop it, it positions the text on the button. And if you look in here, you'll know it's on because it's indented or nested under the button pause. And this text will go with the default font size of 24, but we are going to give it a bit of an outline, say a 2-point outline on the text. And if we play the game, you'll notice now I've not clicked on the viewport. Normally you'd click on the viewport to start the game. My mouse is still active, and if I just roll over this, it's active. You can see the hover. Now if I click on the viewport, what happens? The mouse is now functioning within the game environment and is doing my look around function. If I wanted to do some testing with these on-screen buttons, so when would you use an on-screen button? Well, if you had a touch interface, or if you just wanted to have a mouse menu interface for you. You could also do these with keyboard keystrokes or buttons on your gamepad or whatever. But for demonstration purposes and debug purposes right now, as soon as I click on this interface to play the game, my mouse cursor is gone. So I need to turn the mouse cursor on to do some debugging here. In order to do that in the first person character, and it's kind of a function of this menu system. So we're in the first person character blueprint. We've just added the event begin play here. We've added the ability to display the menu. Well, here's where we're going to set mouse cursor on. And as I type this, you'll see it's giving me no options because it's not a default context related option. If I turn off context sensitive search, I see this set mouse cursor widget and set current mouse cursor. You can change a few things here. And the one we want is the set show mouse cursor. And it defaults to being off, so show mouse cursor needs to be turned on. And here we need to get player controller and then get game, I think it is. Get player. Controller. So get player controller, get player character, all this turns on mouse cursor in game or debug. In our case, it's a debug. But it will turn it on packaged for the end user as well, even in a packaged game. But watch the difference now in the game environment. So again, I've not clicked on this space yet. And if I just move my mouse, you can see it has the hover. But as soon as I click, I've lost the automatic look around. If I click with the left mouse button, I can look around as normal. But now I can also click on the button, and you can see I click the button, I get hover options, and I also get click activity. But this mouse cursor is now visible in the game because of this modification. Event begin play, display the viewport, and then turn the mouse on. This only showed up because I turned off the context sensitive help, and you generally want that on. It's going to limit your options to something that's more appropriate, but in this case I'm just compiling and saving the first person blueprint. Okay, so with that in, we now have the ability to pick this button in game. Now we saw some default activity where we could change things. We had our so we highlighted our text and we put the text on our button. If I come back to the button, you can see that we've got color and opacity values for the appearance, the interaction, button, normal colors when it's hovered over, so if I wanted to change the normal color, or let's say I wanted to change when I hovered it, and we'll just do something silly here and make it yellow. You can see now when I hover, I've got a different color. If I click, it goes back to the default color because we haven't programmed anything differently. Just going to set that back. So we might want nicer looking buttons. So we can actually use images and lay those images on the buttons, and you could choose that image right here. So let's prepare for this. So we have my HUD, and we're going to create a new folder, and let's call it menu images, or menu pieces, menu images. If we were to go over to, say, Open Game Art, or this in Kenny.nl, has a number of different assets, and you may have seen this one. They're classes, assets, and we have like 2D assets, 3D assets. I think we talked about it. Well, actually, we might have talked about it and I misspelled the site and didn't show it to you. So a number of different assets, from 2D assets, 3D assets, and they have one category just for UI components. And you can download these packs of UI components. So if we take this adventure pack, for example, it has all of these items as individual PNG files that we can use. So we could take one of these items and use this as an image on our button. So if I was to download that, I would end up with this one. Downloads. Let's find our Keni on screen. I think it's this one, Keni UI pack. So having downloaded that, I would end up with this folder. There are vector versions, an overall style sheet, and then the raw PNG images. We'll just go with default. And then these are the various images that are included in that download. And these are Creative Commons licensed images here, CC0. And the wrong one. These are Creative Commons licensed objects. Now, we probably eventually want to download and use all of them. For now, I'm just going to grab a couple of them. I'll grab these few buttons here. I'm just going to slide this slightly off screen. We'll bring our user interface back up for this. And let's grab the brown button, gray, and red buttons, and let's just drop them in here. They're PNGs, so they just import. Did we have another color option? No, we didn't. So we had brown, blue, and red buttons. Hover over them, you'll notice they're just simple textures. And in each case, there's a open version and a closed or X'd out version. Let's actually use one of these images on our button. So instead of having a gray button, let's give it this blue colored or gray colored button. So in normal mode here for style, if I wanted to use that, I could simply search for gray, and I could pick the gray button. And let's go one step further and say when it's pressed, I want to use the gray button with the X on it. So now I've got a gray button. Now notice when I hover over it, the hover state, I didn't add the image to it, but if I click on it, you can just barely behind the text block see difference in it. So we should make one more change here, where on the hovered, we should probably use the gray image as well. And so now when I hover over it, you can see it's highlighting it. It's still got the image there though, so instead of going blank, and if I click on it, it actually changes. You can see it's got the darker image, and it's darker than the unhovered one. Now we're talking about this being a pause button, so let's actually change the text. So we're going to highlight text, change our highlighting text here. We should be able to find our text field where it says text block here, and let's just call it, we're going to say pause. So now the button reads as pause. We probably want to stack it in here, so we could just simply take the button and drag it in underneath here. And I probably want it down further. I'm just using the arrows to move it. And now I've got a pause button in my UI. I could divide the horizontal vertical boxes up differently, but for now, this is our demonstration. So now I've got this button, but I can click it, the game's not pausing. So we just really want to put a pause node in here and pause the game. So I've highlighted the button, not the text, but the actual button. And just like some of the other objects in the details panel, there's an event down here where we can do an on-clicked, on-pressed, on-released, on-hovered, or unhovered. So you can actually use these events to trigger things. So maybe when they hover over this, you're going to show them a hint about what this is going to do. So you could use the on-hovered, and as soon as they move the mouse over it, it could pop up some help dialogue. And then when they unhovered, moved away from it, it turned it off. We're going to use one of on-clicked or on-pressed. Nobody have any thoughts on what the difference between on-clicked and on pressed is. Really, that's just an excuse for me to have a sip of coffee. Waiting for Jesse's response here, so I'll have another sip. And Gavin. No, there is a separate on the pressed or released. It's not related to, or sorry, down and up. It's not related to clicked or pressed. It's one is a mouse click. You're clicking with a mouse. The other one is touching with your finger, as in pressing. And for our purposes, the system will interpret both the touch for a touch interface and a click as the same. Where this makes a bigger difference is when you get into a mobile device. So if you're on a Windows tablet or you're onto an Android or iOS device, you're going to want to be using on pressed. And just out of force of habit, I always use on pressed, and it responds to on click as well. So with the button highlighted, we're going to do the on pressed. And we now have, when this button is pressed, what do you want to do? So we could simply drag out a print statement here. And say pressed button. So debug just to see, hey, is this actually working? When somebody presses the button, pause, print something. So now we can highlight it. If we click on it, we see that we have this button at the top here. It says button press. So now that's working. So we know the event's being triggered. We could actually do something useful in here. And what do we want to do? We want to pause the game. And if you just drag out and say pause, you'll get the set game paused. Note that set game paused node defaults to unpaused. I want to click this to say paused. And as soon as I click on it, notice the fire stopped. The background, I don't have any background music, but everything pauses, the fire stopped. Now if I click and I click and I click and I click and I click, nothing happens because we did not program an unpause functionality. So in the main menu, or back in our HUD here, we probably want to flip-flop. We could have an unpause button too, but if we just use a flip-flop, we can use the same on-screen button to pause or unpause our game, providing this time we remember to set it unpaused and take the B channel. Click the button the first time, takes the A channel, should pause the game. Click the button a second time, it should come and run the B channel and unpause the game. So coin stopped spinning, fire stopped, hit it again, and they started. So we now have a functioning pause game button. In here, so this pause toggle on the P key. Oops, sorry, not on the P key, on screen button. What if we wanted to have the P key do it as well? Not only do I want the on screen, I want it to pause when the player presses the P key. We're going to show you one way to do it, and when we get into our enhanced input, we'll come back to this and fix this. For now, I can simply search for the when the P key is pressed, just like we did with the escape key for our game. And I'm just looking here for P key, and I'm in the keyboard events. I'm going to find the P key event here. When the P key is pressed, pause the game. So we could pause and unpause it here with the on-screen button, and pressing the P key pauses, but it doesn't unpause. Any thoughts on why? No, it is flip-flopped. If we look at our logic here, at least I think it is. Yeah, so I did feed it into the flip-flop. I didn't connect it to here. So it's the same input. It's the same event being triggered. When the game is paused, the input, the keyboard is blocked. There's a convoluted way to fix that, but there's a better way to fix this in general because we really shouldn't be using keyboard event here. So we're going to fix this when we use the when we talk about the enhanced input section. We're going to fix this, and we will tell it to any of the events that are related to the pause function to process them when the game is paused. There's some things you don't want to be processed when the game is paused. It should be paused. You don't want health to continue counting and stuff like that. If you had a time-based health decrement, all those functions should pause. They also pause all the user input, including things like pressing the P key or keyboard input in general. So this will pause it for now. It won't unpause it. Before class is done, we'll show you a better way of doing this. For the purposes of the HUD, though, we have a functioning pause button, and it also has this P key that will pause but not unpause. I should be able to use the on-screen button to unpause it. Now, what normally happens when you pause a game? Things froze here, but do you typically still have a nice clear version, or do they sometimes obscure or blur the background or change the menu? Let's do just that. Let's add a blur option, and the easiest way to do that is to actually create another pause screen and display that. So we have one HUD here so far, or user interface widget. I'm going to save this. And we're actually going to create another one. So back in Content My HUD, we created our first one by right-clicking and going User Interface, Widget Blueprint, picking the default user widget, and we called it Main HUD. So I'm going to call it Pause HUD. I've kind of developed a bad habit of Main HUD, Pause HUD having the what this is at the end. You'll see a lot of programmers might use W underscore or WUI or UI as a user interface widget for their naming convention. Some bad habits are hard to break. So with this pause HUD, what I want to have happen is when my player presses the button here, right now they're pausing the game or unpausing the game, but I also want to be able to display a new menu for them. So we're going to double click the pause menu, open it up. We're going to add our canvas here. And we're going to add a piece of text. Guess what the text is going to say? Pause. So we'll have pause here. Let's make it extra big. We'll say 72 points. Up down here, we will center it. Anchor it to the center of the screen. I guess once this is displayed, it is paused, so we don't want to say pause, but paused. Let's just go with this for a minute and use this as what is going to be displayed when our game is paused. Actually, this does bring up one of the challenges though with our menu button, and we'll see that when we, in order to have, well, let's do this pause button. Let's see how this is problematic. So right now we've created a pause display, and this would be displayed once the user presses that. And in order to do that, we're just going to go into our main HUD. So when the user presses the pause button, either pause or unpause the game. So when they pause the game, we want to actually just create a widget. And the widget that we want to create is our pause HUD. And we want to add it to the viewport. I'm going to promote to variable, and we're going to add this to the viewport. Notice by dragging off the return value, it's automatically connecting the execution pin for me. So add to viewport. This promoted this to a variable, and you can see here we have a new variable called newvar, and it's of type pause HUD. So I'm just going to change the name here to pause HUD var. So this should, when the player presses the pause button first time through, should pause it, and then it should add the pause menu. Note that I said add, because what's going to happen is it's going to add it. We have paused here. And again, I can't unpause with the P, but I can by clicking on it. So I've left this on. There is an option possibly for us to remove all widgets from the screen. I can't remember which way I did it in the recorded video. So for now, we're going to leave it this way, and that's leaving our menu on behind it. Now, notice that the background was not blurred out. So if I want to add a blurred background to this, I can search through this big long list manually, or I can just at the top type blur. There's this blur background widget. And somewhere in here should be, I can size it manually. Up at the top, size to content. I can't remember if that works in version. So let's here, set a size to content. I'm going to uncheck that. I'm going to create a nice big blur for the background here. And this time, you'll notice that it's blurring everything, including my pause. Not blurring anything because it defaults to 0% blur. So down here under content, padding, horizontal alignment, appearance, blur strength, defaults to 0. I usually find like 18% blur. And you can see the problem right now. It's blurring this, so I can restructure it. I can also push it to the back. Just change the order on it. It should do it for us. Now the game's paused. I can still access this, but what's happening? Game's pausing. You can see the fire stopping. How come my menu's not going away? Because we haven't told it to turn it off. So this adds the pause HUD to screen. And now we actually want to take it away as well. So here, there isn't a command to remove all widgets, and it would just take all the menus off the screen, but we want to remove from parent. And this is why we made a variable out of this right here, so that we could drag this out and get a reference to pause. So paused. I can't unpause with the P key at the moment, but I can click through and see this. So I have this pause. So in doing that, we've noticed that the text for paused doesn't have our customary outline points. It does make it look a little better. So now if we want the P key to work, there is a way to make this happen here. And again, we don't really want to be using the P key, but the same process applies to the P key and will apply to the enhanced input. If I click on this event node, there is an option here to execute when paused. If I turn that on, compile it and save it, I can use the P key to not do it. Well, because I didn't click on the game. So using the P key will now pause and unpause because we've turned on this functionality here, which is the same functionality we're going to use in the enhanced input, but we are going to expand this to be more than just the P key. Okay, so we have a on-screen menu that has the coins and health being updated. We have a pause button, and we were talking about also adding a mini map. Does anybody have any plans for a mini map in their game? You can use it for other purposes as well. This same type of process with render target textures can also be used for things like in-game security cameras. So you could have a horde of zombies attacking your house, your players on the inside of the house, and you could put simulated cameras on the outside and actually display the view from those cameras on a screen in the game. We're going to use it for a mini map, but it has more than that in applications, and it's using a material called a render target. So we're going to want a button to do that, to turn the mini map on and off, and we're going to use the same process that we just used where we created a new HUD. We're going to use the same process, and we'll have a mini map HUD, and we're going to turn it on and off when the user presses the button. So we're going to start by creating a new user widget interface. We will call it Minimap HUD. How many times can I misspell it here? Minimap HUD. I'm going to open this. I'm going to add our canvas. And also our Minimap HUD is going to have is the actual minimap on it. So we're going to add an image, and that's going to be all that's on here. So under the common items, we're going to add image, and we're going to pick and choose where we want it. Again, up to you based on real estate. I like to size these things again and anchor them based on the top center. So now this would be our option. If we highlight on this, just like we did with the buttons on the other one, we have an option for input, image type, and it's hidden here under brush where we can pick an image. And we don't have that image yet. We're going to create it shortly, but that's where we're going to put it. I'm just going to save and compile this. If we come back to our main HUD, we basically want to replicate our pause button. I'm going to do that. I'm going to duplicate it. We now have a second button here called pause, and we're just going to make changes. We're happy with the overlay, the colors and all that. So I'm just going to duplicate it that we did, and we're going to change the name. So instead of button pause 1, this is going to be button map. And the text should say map, mini map. Highlighted. We are looking for pause here. I'll call it. There's probably enough space for mini map. So now we've got the pause button and we've got the mini map button that's not doing anything yet. So if we look at our HUD and we look at our programming, we have the on pressed for the button pause, but there were no events added to our event graph for the minimap button. I'm making sure the minimap button's highlighted. You can do it here in the outliner or here in the viewport, and we're going to scroll to the bottom. And again, we're picking the on press just so that it works with the touch interface as well as a mouse interface. Touch interface would include like a pen or a stylus if you're on a Windows tablet. Okay, when this button is pressed, you want to do something. Well, guess what you want to do? We pretty much want to do the exact same thing we did up here. So I'm going to save you guys some time watching me drag and mistype things. I will copy a bunch of this. We will paste it in here. We're going to take the pause nodes out. So we're going to flip-flop. Let me get rid of the comment. We're going to flip-flop between displaying the minimap HUD or not. And I want to make sure when we promote this to a variable, so we're just replicating what we had above, but instead of including the pause, we're just adding or removing. When the button's pressed, first time you press it, you want to add the minimap HUD. So we're at minimap HUD. Make a reference to the minimap HUD. Right now the variable is called newvar, so I'm going to change it here to minimap var, and then we don't want to remove the pause one here. What we want to remove is the minimap one. Okay, so when the pause button is pressed, first time through, display or create the minimap HUD, create a reference to it, store it in the variable, and then add it to the viewport, and second time through, remove it. So this should be enough to get our minimap HUD being displayed. So our pause still works. We didn't break anything there. And there we go. We've got our minimap. It's empty right now. It's like the back side of the map. But it is being displayed. So that is our programming for the display and no display of it. So minimap and Remove minimap. Okay, so that's a repeat of the pause functionality, just without the pause in there. We're just adding and removing another user widget. And we simply had our main one, and it's the one that's always displayed based on the fact that we've loaded it in the character, and then turning on and off. This just turns off the minimap. If we look at the minimap, this is the image it's going to display. All we need now is the actual image. So the image itself is a special type of material and texture called a render target material, render target texture, and they're created by in-game cameras. And in-game camera is a scene capture component. Earlier versions of Unreal called it a scene capture 2D or something like that. Scene capture 2D or scene capture camera 2D. The new name is longer and doesn't include the word camera. It's a scene capture 2D component, I think they call it. So it's a little bit differently named. So we're actually going to use that and create material. So we need to actually add the camera to our player. And because this camera follows our player around, we're actually going to modify first person blueprint to do that. So if we look in the first person blueprint, and we've been in here making some changes. This is where we've added our event begin play stuff, and we made other changes earlier in the semester in here. We haven't often looked at this, and here is literally what this character looks like. A camera and a pair of arms. There's no body, right? So this is one of the reasons why you wouldn't necessarily use the first person template as a shooter, because you'd be shooting arms and a rifle on the other player. You wouldn't actually have the body without doing some work. You have to do work if you use a third-party template as well, but either way, should be able to use it. So this is the player we're working with for this game. This camera is the camera that you're following with right now. Unlike the third-person camera, remember in the third-person game, that camera was on a boom arm way back here, and as we swung around, we could move in and out of the fire. Well, in this case, the camera is right mounted on the player's head. It is the same spot because you're seeing from the first person's point of view. Anyways, this is where we want to add our scene capture device. And to do that, we're going to select the root component here, and we're going to say add. And we're going to add a spring arm. And a spring arm is the thing that holds the camera. And you may recall seeing this in the third person when we added that third person, or we modified the third person character event. You may have seen this spring arm. The spring arm is highlighted here. I'm just going to drag it up. Let's add the scene capture component as well. So add component, and it's scene capture component 2D. So this looks like, and for all intents and purposes, is camera. On the end of this spring arm, and if we adjust the length of the spring arm here, we can make it further or shorter. So let's set this to say 400. We've made it a little longer, and we don't want the view from behind the player. We want the view from looking down on the player. So with the spring arm highlighted, we're going to go into rotation mode here, and we're going to tilt it down. So we're looking straight down on the player from this particular height. We're going to save and compile it. With the scene capture camera selected, we can make some changes, and we'll make a few more changes here. But the first thing I want to notice here is that somewhere in this list could be right down here on scene capture, texture target. Where is this going to? And if we highlight, there's nowhere for this to go. So this is like the film or the wire out of the camera? Where's it going to go? We need to actually set up that target. I'm just going to go back into my HUD folder because this is kind of part of the HUD. And we could, I guess, just say create a new folder here. I'm going to call it materials. And in here, we're going to create a special type of material or texture called a render target texture. So under material, I could search it. It's under textures here, render target. So not under material, under texture, render target texture. And I'm going to call it RT for render target underscore minimap. Not very exciting. It's just a blank image for now. What I do want to do is create a material from this. So I'm going to highlight it and right click and say create material. And I'm going to call it M underscore minimap. We need to make a change here because it's being used in the user interface. So I've double clicked on it, opened it. We're going to change the type from surface here. I've highlighted the output from surface to user interface. It's automatically disconnected and I'm going to reconnect it here. And just put a comment here. Changed output node to user interface from surface. So still not very exciting. If we look at the preview of the material, it's blank or black. So let's go back into our first person character. I've highlighted the camera. And now under scene capture target, we should have our RT. I'm going to compile it and save it. And at this point, these are probably still blank. But if I play the game for the first time, we should have this. And if I turn on the minimap, this is still blank because we haven't adjusted the HUD. But if I escape, when I look at these, you can now see that the material and the target are updated. So this is positive. It's encouraging. I think we've got what we wanted. So then let's go to our minimap HUD. And on the minimap HUD, where the image is, under brush, we're going to use the minimap material, not the target, but the minimap material. So M underscore minimap. We now have that as our So now running around the game, we can toggle this on or off. You recall one difference? Sorry, Discord crashed for you or for everybody? Okay, with so now we have the mini map being able to be toggled on and off. One of the differences that we had with the previous game was that it was grayscale or desaturated. Makes it a little more obvious as a mini map. Also sort of makes it stand out from the rest of the game environment. So let's go look at our material setup. Under minimap, M underscore minimap, there's this color image, and if we just drag out from here, we have options to do things like desaturate. Now I've got a grayscale. It desaturates 100%, but there is a scalable value here. I could sorry, that way, sorry, on here I can right click and say add a single constant vector, add it into here, And at 0, there is no desaturation. And if I go 0.6, partially gray. And if I was to go to 1, get a completely gray one. And we can then set this as a parameter, convert to a parameter, and we could call this desat question mark or something like that. And by controlling this particular value, we could choose whether we had a grayscale or color image. For example, you might want a color image when you were playing on a dark nighttime level and a grayscale level when you're playing on a bright daytime one. So I'm going to update the material and save it. So our pause button works, and now our mini-map works, and the mini-map is now a grayscale version. Now, one of the things you'll notice with this is, oops, so used to the default where you run into it and pick it up. So I have to pick the gun up. So now notice that all you see on the mini-map is the gun. You don't actually see the player. So let's fix that. And we can also fix, notice when I turn, the world turns with me. Who thinks the world should turn with me, and who thinks the world should stay straight up and down in the mini-map? Do we have anybody with strong feelings one way or the other? Because right now, as I run around, the world changes on the mini-map with me and is always sort of facing forward. I find that confusing because I would like to know which way the world's orientated, but some people prefer this option. Yeah, GPS stays straight up all the time. So the way to change that is if we go into our first person character, we've got the spring arm highlighted. There's an option here for inherit, pitch, yaw, and roll. We can turn those off, compile and save. And now, whoops, I hit the right button. It'll move with me, but the world always stays orientated the right way. But I still don't see my player. So that we fixed the one thing by highlighting the spring arm, not the camera, but the spring arm, and turning off inherit the pitch, yaw, and roll of the player. So now what we'd like to do is put a marker on top of this, and it's kind of a quick and easy cheat. We basically find a picture of an arrow or something, and from that picture we're just going to put it on a plane, much the way we did when we were talking about materials back in the very early days, and we're going to position it between the camera and the player so that the camera sees the arrow before, and if you get a shadow from it, you can actually turn off the arrow from casting a shadow. That's kind of a interesting little way to do it. So first thing we need is an arrow indicator for the player. So again, you could go to any one of your websites. So if you looked in the stuff we downloaded, there's no real arrow in here. We downloaded this UI pack and there was no real arrow in here. I think when I walked through this last night, I used on-screen controls, sprites, and I think I used okay. So you could use any kind of sprite that you wanted to. I'm going to use this particular one here, line dark with the arrow pointing up. Give me a second here. I have lost everybody. I get nervous when I can't see the recording section going, so. Okay, so I got enough back that I'm comfortable here. Let's go back to line dark here. So I've got this one. This is again part of the user interface. So I'm going to simply add it to the HUD materials section, and I'm going to drag in this up facing arrow. So I have this arrow. And with the arrow, we're going to create a material, and we're going to say M underscore arrow or direction or something like that. And I want to make a couple of changes here. Right now it's this white arrow or black arrow on a white background, and we should be able to possibly set it, surface, set it to translucent. Take the alpha channel opacity, and we've got the arrow on a clear background. So here we changed, we had the output node selected, and we changed the blend mode from opaque to translucent. From opaque to on output node. So now this gives us a material that has a transparent background and just has that black arrow on it and the circle around. So all we're simply going to do is, with the main item selected here again, we're going to add component, and we're going to add a flat plane. And we're going to, with the plane selected, change the gizmo to move mode, drag it up. I'm going to leave it down here just a bit for a minute. Position it, and with that plane selected, we're going to set the material from the basic shaded material to the arrow material that we just created, so M underscore arrow. And if we zoom in, notice the blue arrow is the forward direction for the character, as is this red arrow, X, so red is forward. And if you look at the arrow that we just placed in here, the plane, it's facing the other way. What we would like to do is, just with the plane selected, go with the rotation, E to go into rotation mode, and set it 90 degrees positive so that the indicator on the image matches the indicator of the object. So now sometimes when you do this trick, you will notice a shadow. Okay, so I don't have a shadow on this. Depends on your image and whatnot. You would have a shadow here, and if I turn on the mini map, now you can see, instead of having nothing or just the gun, if I was to pick the gun up here, you can see, actually there, you can see the shadow of the gun. You don't see the shadow of the object. So I can do a couple of things with this object. I can scale it up, or I can change its position. So with the first person character blueprint again, I'm going to just change this to the move mode. I'm going to move it closer to the camera, and that's going to make it look larger in the minimap. So now I've got a bigger indicator. The other thing we can do in the first person character with the camera selected is you can start to mess around with the camera lens value. There's a perspective versus orthographic view. So orthographic would be a square top-down view. Perspective gives you those sloped sides that we're seeing on the building. So you can start to manipulate some of those. So pretty cool little use for that render target material. The other thing we could do is, say we were, basic shape. Let's add a plane. Drag it up. Rotate it. And if I was to take that particular material, let's call this top-down TV. Pick this material. Back into details for this guy. Pick the material here, and again, we're going to pick that arrow material. Now, this may cause a little bit of grief in some case. Oh, sorry, not the arrow material. The RT map material. So now you can see that's being updated on that material. So if you were doing something like an in-game security camera, or you wanted to remotely view a different part of the game environment, something like this render target material could be useful for that. Now, in some instances, because I've set this main material to a user interface material, you may have a little bit of grief with it. I would just duplicate the material and use the standard material type instead of the user interface material where we made that one change. But the trick here is the render target. And if we wanted to, we could take this scale it up 3 times or something. Now we've got a view in game. So if you had a multiplayer game or something, other players could see. Oh, it's stuck on a coin, right? So you have some in-game. Well, but the main purpose of that was the mini-map on or off and the HUD. So we now have a somewhat functional HUD on-screen menu system, but most of the controls have been a little wonky. We had the P key to do some stuff, the F key to do the pickup, and if we were to introduce something like the joystick to this, you would have to reprogram or add those inputs to it. Now we have to add the inputs with what we're doing, but what we're going to do is allow this to be changed on the input control section and not have to go in and modify each of the blueprints that has like F to pick up and E to pause and M for minimap. Actually, we didn't do the M for minimap. We will do that in the enhanced input section. Okay, we're getting close to wrapping up here. I just want to talk briefly about the enhanced input section process. This is a newer subsystem in Unreal, and it's a big advantage because it does provide some hardware abstraction from what we're doing, and you'll see that as we get going with it. So let's do the M for minimap to toggle minimap on and off. And while we're at it, maybe we'll use the one of the buttons on the controller to turn that on as well. And again, you don't need a controller for what we're doing. It's just a demonstration of the enhanced input system and how it can be used across different devices. So the templates come, this is the first person template. The templates come with a bit of a default system set up. So under first person input, we have this IMC default and then IMC for weapons. So IMC is the input mapping context, and then we have these actions. So if we look at the action names, you know, there's a jump action, a look, a move, and a shoot. Basically what your player does. So let's think about toggling the minimap on and off, and let's add a action for minimap. So in order to do that, we need to make a change to this IMC default. And if we look in here under mappings, let's look at the jump option, for example. The IA jump function, if we expand it, can be triggered from the spacebar, or if you're using the gamepad, it's one of the face buttons. Either one of those should cause your character to jump. And if you wanted them to move, there's a whole bunch more options. So movement, here's the WASD keys for keyboard. You can do up, down, left, right for the arrows on your keyboard, or you could use the left thumbstick. Expanding one of these gives you more detail about it if there is more detail available. For example, here on the modifiers, have a dead zone on your stick so that, in the middle it doesn't do anything, blah, blah, blah. So we're going to add a IA input action minimap to turn the minimap on and off, and that's going to start with us creating the action. So under actions, I'm going to right click and say input, and we're going to create an input action, and it's going to be called IA for input action and move. Sorry, not minimap, IA. Once that's created, I should be able to, in the IMC default, add some key bindings to it. So under mappings, I'm going to add, and what do I want to add here? So I'm just going to click on this, expanding this. I've got a couple of empty ones now. And choose under keyboard, scroll down to find M, and now when the M key is pressed, this action is going to happen. And for now, I'm just going to leave it at the IA minimap is going to be triggered by pressing the M. So here, on pressed button minimap, when we press the on-screen button, and what we did last time was when we wanted the keyboard, we actually did this event, we used the raw event P. And I could do the same here. I could have searched for M key and found that. But what we want to do instead is use the IA input minimap. So now when the enhanced input minimap event is triggered, it should turn that on and off. So functionally in game, you'll notice we're getting some bounce, and we'll fix the bounce in a second. The M key is turning that on and off. So it's functionally the same as what we did with the P. However, the magic comes in if we wanted to add other inputs for other devices. So, the gamepad controller, the PlayStation controller, or a flight stick or something, you can actually map the buttons for those devices to these. So if we go into IMC default, and I wanted to add a different input, I could simply add another item here. So this was the one we did earlier. So now let's go and add a gamepad button, and let's go D-pad up. So the gamepad D-pad up button is now also going to trigger the minimap. I'm going to save it. Here, if I grab the controller and hit the minimap up, click on the game to start playing the game, and then, so now I've got this coming and going. So now I've got to make a change, but instead of going into the HUD and adding, I want the D-pad, I also want the whatever options are here, what other things, if I add another one, if we look under, these are all the different events and different parts that are recognized just by default. So mouse actions, if you have touch or motion things, gesture inputs, the keyboards that we've used, Steam Deck controllers, the Xbox controllers, specific controllers for Android devices if you're running this on an Android, and again for VR for Vive's, Valve Index, Oculus Touch. mixed mixed reality. So any one of these things could trigger this. So for example, the Android back button. Yeah, Switch Pro. When you're dealing with the Switch, um, things like when you, if say PlayStation, Nintendo Switch, not so much Xbox, but in some cases, some of the Xbox advanced functionality is enabled once you have a proper developer's license for that platform, and then Switch controllers would be appear in here as well once you've enabled that within SDK within the environment. So for now, I could actually just go and say, oh, this is also a VR game or something, and say it's the Vive left trigger button. And now when this was run on a Vive, you could use the left trigger button to bring up the menu as well. All without having to modify this other than to add that. So if I wanted to do the same for here, we want to make sure we want to do an IA pause action and have it trigger this. And we want to be aware that it also does needs to get processed when it's paused. So if we look at options here, we don't have a new one to add yet, so we have to add our action first. Yeah, you end up with conflict of which shim is dealing with the controller and passing it or emulating it onto the others. So we want to add another input here, an input action, and that's going to be the pause function. So under input action, we're going to say IA underscore pause. Oh, the bouncing on the IA move. On these items here for triggers, if we simply set this to pressed, we can start modifying things for these actions. Like, it has to be pressed or it has to be held down. How long does it have to be held down for? If you want to do a repeating gun, you could use this pulse and set the pulse values. If we set this to pressed on the IA move, sorry, do that, close that. Want IA minimap. When the minimap was firing, we were getting that bounce. This is where I want to set it to pressed. Save it. So now when I hit minimap, I'm not getting the toggling. And again here, I'm no longer getting the bounce back and forth. It's just toggling on and off. And that was by changing that option on here to be pressed. So one place to control this, the action, allowed me to fix both the keyboard input and the gamepad input. Nice. And in the default mapping, I can choose how many different processes do that. So we wanted to add the IA pause, and we're going to have that same problem. So I've got IA pause created. I'm just going to go and modify the trigger here with pressed so that we have the same kind of debounce logic on it. In IMC default, we're going to add another mapping. This time we're going to choose the IA pause, and we want the pause to happen on what? So I can expand this. There's one by default, and it's going to be the E key. Let's say I want to pick one of the buttons on the gamepad. So I clicked plus to add another one, and I'm going to pick gamepad. And now the challenge is remembering which button's which. Let's just go with D-pad down to do the pause. So P or D-pad down should do a pause. So I'm going to save this. Playing the game. If I D-pad up gives me my mini map, and D-pad down isn't working because we didn't program it. we set up the input. But remember back here when we did our HUD, this is where I said we shouldn't be using the raw keyboard event. So I'm going to pull that out. And now we're simply going to do IA pause. Input action IA underscore pause. So I want to make sure use the input action event IA pause. Drag that in here. And now either the P key from the keyboard or the D-pad here down. Click on the game. Should give us the pause and unpause functionality. What do we got happening here? Oh, I messed up the when I accidentally hit the move functionality. I messed up that, so I'll have to fix that up before I publish this code. So my intent with this was to go through, talk about the menu system, do the buttons. So we got the buttons running. We have the mini map popping up and down, the game pausing, dynamically updating the coins. Now, if you take what we've talked about so far, you could go a step further. If you were to say start a new level that was totally blank and black, nothing on it, you could create a new HUD menu of your own. You could populate it with buttons, and that could be the game start menu. And from there you can have a button to start the game, load a previous game, play from a specific point or whatever, or quit the game. And all you would do would be, say, for the start game button, would be open the start level. If you wanted to play from a previous game, you would retrieve, and we're going to talk about this part next week, retrieve previous game stats and then open that level with those game stats loaded on the player. And we've seen how to add and remove widgets. The one we didn't talk about was remove. Oh no, we did remove from parent. What we didn't do was remove all widgets, because you could, instead of taking away just part of one of the widgets, you could remove all the widgets or all the interfaces from the screen. How's this been for a discussion on sort of menus on screen? We're getting close on time here. I want to have a quick chat about assets, or do we? Yeah, let's do a quick chat on assets here. Let me close a couple of these windows. I'll fix up the move functionality before I post this code, and I'll post the code later on tonight. So the same link that I shared last night, I will just push the new version up to that and use that as a demonstration for the menu subsystem. So we don't have too many models in here yet, and if we look at our notes, so we've covered the render target discussion, the minimap on off. We talked about the input actions. You guys are already familiar with some of this from last year in your work with the other games and finding assets. And there's Sketchfab, TurboSquid, all these different sites that you can download assets from. A lot of the sites will require you to have a account, and on that site you'll have free and paid assets. You can generally find a free asset for what you need. Nothing that you do in my class will require you to purchase an asset, but if you're building your game and you want a certain look and feel, it'll be up to you whether you pay for an asset. Some assets are dirt cheap. Support the artist, great. Some of them are crazy expensive. So on some of these sites, there are a variety of different assets. So let's look at. So here is 3D export, and they will have different options. So here I've checked free and I think I'm searching in the decorations category, and you can find things like a luminous square. I don't know how that's a decoration, but it's not, I guess, a car. Things like statues and cutouts and vases and whatnot. Quite a variety of free assets. If you remove the free checkbox, of course, you get into paid ones. Sometimes something like this might be reasonable at $17 for all these assets, providing they're a good quality asset and represent what you want and they're textured right. For $7, I guess it is. But sometimes you get some really crazy ones like $400 because the author put a lot of time into it. But is it really worth that for you? So in any of these sites, you can usually choose to get more information and to tell you, it's in 3ds Max format, or here's Wavefront OBJ. So unless you had access to Autodesk's 3ds Max or Maya, you would have a hard time importing these two formats. But just about everybody has a tool that will import an OBJ file. This isn't a programming OBJ, this is a Wavefront object file. It's a 3D model file format. The Wavefront file format. You can take that. In some cases, you can plug them into Unreal if you enable a plugin, or you can take it into Blender, clean it up, and export it. A number of 3D modeling tools will let you modify that. You guys have you used any 3D modeling tools in the program so far? I know we don't talk about it in this particular course. You have Blender, so Blender will import OBJs all day long, and then you can export it as an FBX file. So that'll be your conversion tool of choice. I think Max and or Maya is available on the computers, but I mean, every additional tool that you use has an extra learning curve to it and more time commitment. So if you've got experience with Blender, would be the tool I would use for that. So sometimes when you find an asset, you need to do a conversion. If you do find it in a format that's directly usable, you still may need to do some conversion. So if we take, for example, not that one. This one on TurboSquid, you can see by setting their price range to $0, they alternate between a free resource and a paid resource, so you do have to be careful when you're clicking around. Now, you won't accidentally download them, but it just gets irritating when you think, oh, these are all the perfect people that I want, and you set it to 0 and they gave you a $50 asset. Anyway, so in this case, again, if we highlight the object, they will tell you a little bit about the format, how many polys it is, the native file formats. Some of the paid assets will have an option where you can request the author convert it for you. I don't know how fast they are. It would be dependent on the author. A lot of these sites, individual artists or authors create the material, upload them, and resell them. So TurboSquid or 3D Export is not the original author. They're the broker reselling the product for you. So in this example, let's let me find the folder I want here. Downloads. So I'm just viewing off screen here. I'm looking for the folder I downloaded last night with a Kinder Egg in it. Unpack it again. So here we have Chocolate Gift FBX, which is a Kinder Egg downloaded from TurboSquid. I'm doing an extract all. Make sure instead of just double clicking on the zip that you do an extraction, as it won't work properly. You won't get the materials and everything. So do an extraction, proper full extraction first, and then use that extracted file directory instead of just double clicking on the zip and letting Windows open it, presumably open it for you. Sorry, so I already had this unpacked. This is the folder I was looking for. Lost it again. Here it is. It has two things. It has this 3D model file, and if I do properties, you can see it's an FBX file. I chose this one because it was FBX ready to go. Some versions of Windows Creative 1802, Windows 10 Creative Edition, and later we'll have this model viewer. I believe it's turned off on the college. I'm not sure if it's on in the game lab or not. We could check it, but it's an FBX viewer. It comes in with no material, not uncommon, and then has a separate file, this texture. That's the actual wrapper. If I was to take this, let's go to content and my audio, my models. Let's add a folder for Kinder Egg. So I've created under my models Kinder Egg, and if I bring this folder back, I can drop this on here. Now here's one of the things. I'm going to import this twice to show you the difference. I think in here we're going to notice that combined meshes is typically off by default, and I'm going to leave it off, and I'm going to say import all, and we now have a material, and it looks broken because it's all white. And then we have two options here. One looks empty. It's actually not. So let's open this one first. It's the first half of the egg. And what happens if I go to the other side of the egg? Where did it go? How come the egg's not showing up? Any thoughts on why the egg's not showing up? You ate it, yeah. It is that time, eh? Time for an afternoon snack. Actually, it's really close to the end of class. Not showing up because it's a single-sided material and we're looking at the back side of it. It's also two parts. This piece that looks empty, we're just looking at the back side of it. So let me quickly wrap up here. We're going to delete these two objects. Yes, I'm going to force delete them. I'm going to bring this back up. I'm going to re-import the model. With the model, this time I'm going to say combine meshes and import all. And now the egg is complete with one as one model instead of two different pieces. So I've got both halves, but the material's still messed up. So the first sort of mishap was that it imported in pieces. Not uncommon to go to like Steelcase Furniture and download a chair model, convert it, import it, and you know what? The chair comes in eight or 10 different pieces, none of it lined up properly. By combining the meshes, they line up and then get inserted as a single one. Sometimes you want them combined, sometimes you don't. So this is still broken. The material is plain white. It didn't recognize the material. So we're going to bring this up. We're going to drag in the texture as well. So now we have a texture, and I'm going to take this material, delete this. So this is kind of a recap on our texture discussion or material discussion. Dragging in the material, connect the base color. Kinder eggs are wrapped in foil, right? So let's give it a metallic wrapping, 0.8, and let's make it smoothish, not completely glossy, so 0.18. That's not bad for a Kinder Egg wrapper in 30 seconds. So now, yes, I want to save this. Now if I open my Kinder Egg, I've got a properly modeled asset. So sometimes the assets that you download require cleanup, and some of it can be done in Unreal just with the way you handle it. Some of it can be done in the modeler, and sometimes if you're more familiar with the third-party tool or you need some more extensive operations, sometimes doing it in a 3D modeling tool is better. So right now I've not programmed anything on this, but if I go in game, you can now see we've got a Kinder Egg in game. So this could be another collectible. I could make a blueprint out of it and create this as a collectible item. Just the way we did with the coins, and we'll do that along the lines of the sort of master blueprint or parent blueprint and child blueprints. Okay, sorry for running so long this week. There was a lot of material. I was correct. We didn't get to the equip discussion. We will get to that possibly next week. Next week, we are also going to talk about doing the save game data and persisting the value or scores across the level. Right now, if we play our game, don't pause it, and go to the next level. Oh, I've messed up that move. I got to fix move before I can play. Nice comment, Gavin. Yes. There are geolocation nodes, especially when you get into mobile. You can tie into a mobile phone's geolocation stuff. Anyways, that is it for today. I am going to stop the recording. I won't get the recording posted. I've got to head onto campus to teach my next class at 4. I need some time to get there and for some nourishment. So I won't. I'll fix this code and post it later tonight, and I will also transcode the video and post the video. Probably be tomorrow morning before I post the video. Any last comments or questions before we wrap up? Okay, hopefully that gave you a good insight to sort of top level overview of the on-screen menu, the HUD or the UMG system. That link that references Zenreal documentation is a vast amount of knowledge on that for you to dig into if you're wanting to go beyond the basics that we've done here today. And then a little bit about the enhanced input system. Next week, we'll get into some save game data, game instance objects, and we'll try and deal with the equip piece as well. Okay? Have a good week. If you have questions or comments, send them through. Similarly, as you're submitting assignment 2, I'll be offline teaching for the next few hours, but after that, I'll be back online if you have some questions about assignment 2 that's due tonight. And then this week, the test opens and is due next week. Remember, with the test, you have 3 attempts. It's open all week. You can use any resource you want. The only resource asked that you not use is your classmates. So Google, find the answers that you want on your own, and then submitted. It's 40 some questions, 75 minutes, auto completes, automatically graded, and then manually reviewed. Okay, have a good week. Yep, next week we're in person too.